When we had our first conversation, I said to you, hey, I am not applying to HBS. I don't want to waste my time. I think a lot of that came from imposter syndrome. You said, Zoe, why are you not applying to HBS? You helped me unpack that imposter syndrome in our very first call. Now I'm here as an HBS graduate.
I'm excited to catch up. Do you mind sharing kind of a little bit about what you did before business school in your career?
After I graduated from Vanderbilt, I joined Teach for America. So I taught sixth grade English for 2 years in Dallas. 2 years became 4 years. And at that fourth year mark, I started to think about what I wanted to do next. And consulting felt like an appropriate next step, as many of us in TFA pursue consulting after. So I was in consulting for about 6 years after I finished my TFA commitment.
I was thinking back from our initial conversation, one thing you were worried about a little bit was like kind of amount of work experience, the tenure you had when you were applying. As you think back on the admissions process, did you feel like that was a big anxiety for you? And how did you think about that in the admissions process? And I'm curious to hear how it's been at HBS.
It was definitely a source of anxiety for me. So I think when you check on most of those class profiles for all the top programs, usually students have about 5 years of work experience, and I was coming in with just over 10. And so I was worried, A, that I had sort of missed the boat on going to getting into an MBA program at the right time, quote unquote. And B, that, admissions committees would see my application and say, oh, she's too old. Why is she not, thinking about an exec ed program? But I will say at HBS, there are certainly a lot of students that are in their 30s. And so for me, I actually am grateful that I went when I did, because I do feel like I was able to add a lot to the case conversations and to my learning in general. And so I think definitely do not be dissuaded from applying to business school for a full-year program or full-time program, even if you don't have the 5 years of typical experience, because there's a lot of value that you can add, even with that having additional work experience than your peers.
Others, I'm sure, will be very reassured hearing that. I do feel like very frequently that is a topic of conversation and anxiety among applicants. Why did you decide to go to business school?
I was sort of at an inflection point towards the end of my third-ish year in consulting at the firm I was at. And I was noticing, number one, I was getting paid less than the MBAs that were coming in with no consulting experience. And number two, I was really starting to question whether consulting was something that I wanted to do in the long term. And given that I had a non-traditional career path, again, starting in education, I wasn't sure that I had the acumen or the skills to pivot into something else. And to be fully transparent, I wasn't really sure what that something else was. And so for me, it felt, most logical to pursue getting an MBA and going back full time so I could dedicate myself fully to my personal and professional development to be ready for whatever that next step.
We talked some about applying as a bit older applicant. And another thing I get a lot of questions around is how to approach the process as a reapplicant. What were your concerns as you were going into that process, and what advice would you have for others?
Great question. So I am one of the students that applied for business school right before COVID. So I would have submitted my first round of application in January of 2020. And so I found out that I had gotten accepted to business school right when COVID was starting in March. I got into 7 schools. I was so thrilled, so excited. But ultimately, HBS was the only school that was offering that blanket deferral for any students that didn't want to pursue their MBA during those uncertain times. And I actually did not get in. So I'd gotten into Wharton, gotten into some other schools, and none of those schools were offering that blanket deferral. And so basically my option was, you either go to business school now or you reapply to business school in the fall. And so I decided to reapply. And when we had our first conversation, I said to you, hey, I am not applying to HBS. I don't want to waste my time. I think a lot of that came from imposter syndrome. Wharton was where my heart was at. I was like, just get me into Wharton for the second time in a couple of months. Help me, Heidi. And in our first conversation, you said, Zoe, why are you not applying to HBS? And I think that was so important and something that I'm so grateful to you for, because you helped me unpack that imposter syndrome in our very first call. And that's how I knew that you were the consultant that I wanted to work with. Because I think had you not pushed me on that, Wharton would have been the only school that I was focused on getting back into, and I would not have had any desire to apply to HBS. And now I'm here as an HBS graduate. So I'm so grateful for you pushing me, and more importantly, helping me understand that I'm enough and that I could, produce a fantastic application and I'd be a great addition to the class of 2023. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I feel very emotional right now. I do feel like that is like my favorite part of the role, and a lot of what I focus on is helping bring forward people's strengths and helping them develop, the confidence to attack some of these really scary and daunting schools. And it is so common to like look up profiles of people in the classes and then feel like, okay, I'm not even going to apply there. Like, how do I even have a chance? I always like see so many beautiful things to share with the admissions officers. And yeah, I felt like when you submitted your application, I just remember very vividly, I can't imagine if they do not accept her. Like, they would be crazy to do so. So thank you for sharing that with me. What do you think were some of the things as you think about the HBS essay, which can be so daunting for applicants, and which I felt like our process of working together was very memorable? What did you think was helpful in terms of our work together and the approach you took with the essay?
The individualized support that I got from you. So to your point, the HBS essay is incredibly daunting. It's essentially an open prompt. And I think I really needed to figure out what part of my story did I want to share with the admissions committee? And most importantly, how do I convey that in about 1,000 words, even though there's no word limit, but still. And so I think in our conversations, it became abundantly clear that I needed to talk about DEI and how that had impacted me throughout the course of my life. And so I think, again, so grateful for your guidance, because my original essay and what I thought I was going to write about versus what I actually ended up writing about were two very, very different things. And I think your line of questioning, the way that you kept pushing me to dig deeper, one step further, be more vulnerable, was so, so helpful for me. And when I actually sat down to write the essay that we discussed in our conversations, it came right out of me, versus some of the other essays that I wrote for some of my other packages felt like, all right, another prompt, let me get this one out, versus this one felt like my real, true, authentic story of me. And so, yeah, I think it was that line of questioning and you sort of pushing me to think deeper and think bigger. As I approach that essay.
I really admired the level of reflection you took towards that, and also strength in your language, and vulnerability. Those are all hard things to get. Are there any other resources that you felt like were helpful, or approaches that you took as you were going through the admissions process?
I was in an organization called Management Leadership for Tomorrow, which was a group that helps students of color get into top MBA programs. Highly recommend it. The reason that I ended up seeking out your help was just for that additional individualized attention. And so I think as a woman of color, I had, as I mentioned before, a lot of imposter syndrome going through the application process. And so for me, MLT was a really good first step to figure out, okay, what schools am I interested in? Where do I actually think I should be targeting? But then my work with you, I think, helped me really take my package to the next level, which was absolutely amazing.
What advice do you give, or what do you ask when people ask, like, what makes for a good fit with HBS? And having been a student now, and
I would say you have to be really comfortable being super uncomfortable. So many of you know at HBS, we learn solely through the case method. The first time that you get your very first cold call in front of your 92 section mates is a daunting moment for sure. But it doesn't have to be as harrowing of an experience as many think it is. And so I think you need to lean into the fact that, sure, this is uncomfortable, but we're all here to learn. And I think one great thing that the professors do at HBS is create a really safe environment for us to have important conversations and dialogues. Your section mates are not going to make fun of you. You just need to be comfortable, though, with the fact that when you hear your name and you are opening up a case, it's go time. And I would also say being open, right? So I think so many times when you start the business school experience, you're terrified, right? Am I going to make friends? Am I going to fit in? And then add the fact that you're at HBS. I was a Black woman, afraid that no one is going to want to be my friend, or, am I even meant to be here? I have no quantitative background. I don't come from a wealthy family. And so I couldn't have been more wrong. My classmates were so open, so welcoming. I've made some of the closest friends that I've ever made in my entire life at HBS. I have fantastic relationships with faculty and with administration at school. And it has been one of the best experiences of my whole life. So I think be open to the experience and then be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I love that too. I think also really nicely connects with advice for the essay. So I think kind
Right.
of like if you can demonstrate some of those things in the essay, I think that also is a nice kind of layer to bring on. I also wanted to ask if you share a little bit about your HBS interview experience.
So the HBS interview is dissimilar from any other business school interview that you'll sit through. For most of my other interviews, it was clear to me that my interviewer may have just looked over my resume maybe a few minutes before the call. With the HBS interviewer, that individual has done a deep dive. They've likely spent hours researching your background, your entire package, and they know who you are. And so I think my greatest advice there is if they know who you are, you need to know who you are even better than they do. And so you should know every single thing that you've put in your package, whether it's on your resume, in your essay, in your short answers, and be able to speak to it and then speak to it like 5 levels deeper. Because that's what I found, at least in my interview, was my interviewer knew high level who I was. And I would say even like 3 levels down who I was as an individual. And she wanted to get even deeper. And so it felt like she was asking very intentional questions. And every question she asked was, and what, and I mean, it just kept going, tell me more, tell me more. And so I think you just have to be comfortable telling your story. And again, if you reference it in any part of your package, it is fair game.
Would you mind sharing with me if you felt like there was something that connected during our initial call, or what made you ultimately decide you were excited to work with me in mbaMission?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I can absolutely speak to this. So on the website, there are videos of each of the consultants. And so the bottom line is this: every consultant has a great background. You all clearly know what you're doing. You have expertise in this field. But I sat and watched your video, and the warmth that you were radiating from the video, I was just so thrilled to get to meet you, Heidi. And so for me, as someone that, like I said before, I have confidence issues. I'll be honest with you about that. I knew that, this was something that had been a daunting experience for me the first time that I'd gone through a few months earlier, the application process. And so it was really important to me that I found someone that had really high emotional intelligence and was going to be able to ask me sort of those right questions to pull out the best that I could for this package. And so after I watched your video, like, I need to meet her. Just because, again, that warmth, that kindness, that empathy that you radiated through the video, I felt like was going to help me get to that next step. And in our first conversation, I felt so free almost being able to reflect and be honest with you about my experiences. And you were able to pull out and tease out, I think, the depths and the vulnerability that I needed to put into my application. And I don't know that I would have felt safe going there with every other consultant. And so, again, I think those videos were so helpful, and working with you was really a game changer for me personally.
I view it as almost sacred how much people share with, me in the process. So on that point, I did want to dig in a little. I remember on working on your HBS essay, we were kind of going back and forth. There was particularly one line in the essay that felt really vulnerable. Can you walk me through a little bit how you felt about making that decision about whether to include it or not, and then what your thoughts are, now about taking some risks in that essay?
I know exactly which sentence you're talking about, Heidi, and I wrote that essay years ago. I think that I'm so grateful that we took the risk. Here's kind of my thought process on this. You have to put it all out on the table. One thing that I will say about HBS, these admissions folks, they want to hear who you are. They don't want to hear the BS. They don't want fluff. They want you to be authentically you. And I felt like that sentence that you're referencing was me truly being authentically me and telling whoever was reading my essay exactly how I felt in that moment for those first several years of my life. And so I'm so grateful we took the risk. I know at the time we went back and forth. I talked to my parents about it. I talked to several of my friends about it who've known me, who've worked with me, my mentors about it. And folks were a little nervous. They were like, "Are you want to include that?" And it's like, I kind of feel like I got to do this. And so I'm so thankful that you pushed me to do it. And it's actually one of the sentences that when you get a phone call from your your admissions person once you get accepted to HBS. And it's one of the sentences that she referenced, actually. It's one of those things where it hit her. And I think it's like, okay, then that's what I was meant to do. I mean, clearly she remembers it, and she's referencing it on the day I've gotten in to my dream school. And I'm grateful again that you pushed me and I was able to unpack and feel safe enough to take that risk.
I think it was a nice illustration of like how we also work as a team at mbaMission. It's mostly one-on-one work, but I think I checked with you and been like, you know what, let me run with this by some of my colleagues as well and make sure like we're feeling all comfortable, that this isn't, too aggressive. Another thing that I hear from a lot of people have anxiety around is like, how do I differentiate as one more consultant applying to business school? Do you have anything that you felt like was helpful in the process that you did, or tips that you give? I'm sure you talked to a lot of consultants applying to business school who are looking for your advice.
Every business school class has several consultants in it. And I think you have to figure out, and I don't know, like, I hate the word differentiate, but I know why you're using it. You have to figure out what makes you authentically you and why you believe that you deserve a seat in that class. And so for me, like, I feel like I just spoke about my like authentic self, and I just tried to be as real as possible. Again, I always come back to at HBS, I feel like they can read through the BS without much, like they hate it. They can read through it like that. And so I think if you're just going to business school for it to be a checkbox, with the intent of returning, back to your consulting firm, that's totally fine. But what else? Like, there's something else that makes you you. And I think unless you're willing to do the work to unpack who you really are and why you want a seat at that school, I don't know that you're ready to go to business school yet, is sort of my thing. Like, absolutely, I know for a lot of us, business school is a checkbox. I get that. But there's something that makes you uniquely you, and you've got to put in the work to figure that out. So I think every consultant absolutely stands a chance of getting into HBS or any other business school. You've just got to do the work to figure out what makes you unique.